Can people hear me at the back? Can you all hear me? Cool. Awesome. Hello and welcome to London Accessibility Meetup. Happy New Year, 2019. So this is the 22nd London Accessibility Meetup. Hands up if this is the first time you've attended. So I reckon that's about half the room, third of the room. I always say that. So we've got another really exciting lineup today. So we've got Charley Pothecary talking about the business case for inclusive design. We'll then have a break for half an hour. We don't normally have this much pizza. They gave us more pizza than we ordered. So it looks like there's lots of food left. So there's vegetarian pizzas, there's meat pizzas, and there's also some vegan rolls. So do make the most of those in the break. There should be lots of drinks as well. And then we've got Mike Gifford talking about open source and some of the challenges. So got two really exciting talks and speakers. We will be finishing at about 9 o'clock, and some of us will be heading to a local pub if you want to kind of carry on the networking. So I want to say an absolutely massive thank you to Sainsbury's and to Raf. Where's Raf? Is he in here? Okay, so just a thank you to Sainsbury's for hosting us in this amazing venue. We've actually got dates booked for the next 3 months, so I'll share those with you at the end. Also, a huge thank you to Barclays Access. So they provide sponsorship, and the drinks, the food, the speech-to-text, and the video that we have, that is all paid for by Barclays, so huge thank you to them. Hands up if this is the first event you've been to where there's been speech-to-text. So I reckon there's about 100 people here. I reckon that's about 20 hands. So huge thanks to Orla from MyClearText, who does incredible work. We often kind of get asked, how does this work? It must be a computer. It's not. It is a real human being doing much better than a computer can ever do. So thank you, Orla. And then also a big thank you to Meetup Video as well. So we're live streaming the videos, and we will also be publishing videos of the talks within the next couple of days. So do spread the word. A few bits of housekeeping. So toilets, if you head back towards the lifts, the ladies' toilets are on the right and the men's toilets are on the left. We don't have a fire drill plan, so if there is an alarm that goes off, it's the real thing. So we will all make our way out in an orderly fashion. And a big plea with regard to litter. Please take any cans or litter that you've got with you out when you go. There are bins outside. Sainsbury's let us use this amazing venue, and they want it back in the same condition as before we came. So please take your litter. I always do a bit of a hands up session. Hands up if you work in the public sector. So I reckon that's about 30 people. Hands up if you work in the private sector. So that's slightly more, so call that 40. Hands up if you work in the third sector, so for charities or those sorts of things. About 10 people. Hands up if you work for something else. Is there anything else that covers most things? Where do you work? You're a student. Hands up if you're a student. We've got a few students as well. Welcome. Hands up if you're a designer. Okay, big show of designers, probably 50 people. Hands up if you're a content writer, about 5. Hands up if you're a developer, so about 30. Hands up if you're a user researcher, about 10. Hands up if you are an accessibility professional, about 15. Hands up if you work in policy. So that just so that Tony can put his hand up. There's one. There's a few. Cool. Okay. Brilliant. Hands up if you consider yourself an accessibility expert. Just a couple. Okay. So this hopefully is a really nice place to come and learn and find out more about accessibility. Most of us aren't accessibility experts. We are fortunate enough to get really good speakers sharing some amazing stuff. So do keep coming and ask questions and network during the breaks. So we're going to kick off with the first talk. Really excited to have Charley talking about the business case for inclusive design. I will Brilliant, seamless. Please put your hands together and say a massive thank you to Charley.
Hi there, thank you for that. So my name is Charley Pothecary. I'm a service designer at Idean, and I'm going to be talking about the business case for inclusive design today. And in particular, going to be talking about how we internally at Idean are trying to make the case to our clients for inclusive design. So the aim today is to help you to encourage others to be able to design more inclusively. We're going to be talking about what is inclusive design. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. We're going to be talking about why it's important, but also how do we make other people see why it's important, particularly clients, and fighting some of the barriers that those clients will often maybe come back with us against, and maybe some tips and tricks. So going to start with a quick activity, borrowing from Alistair. It's going to be a hands up one, so I hope you're all ready. So can you please put your hand up and keep it up if you've ever missed your tube stop because you were listening to music maybe a little bit too loud? Okay, so keep your hands up. Put your hand up and keep it up if you've ever travelled with lots of luggage or a large suitcase across London. Okay, a few more. Put your hand up if you've ever had a really sore throat and it hurts to speak. Okay, and put your hand up and keep it up if you've ever fallen over or almost fallen over on the tube because you're carrying way too many things and you can't hold on to the railings. Right, so that's pretty much everyone in the room. So the point being, everyone put their hand up at that point. Most people experience a temporary impairment at some point in their lives. So one of the largest barriers that we have when we're asking clients to understand why it's important to be accessible and to design inclusively is people will think that it's not just for kind of everybody, it's just only for particularly for people that have disabilities. However, an easy way of us being able to explain that design for all is just making better design is to be able to get them to understand that everyone will experience temporary impairments at some point. So this is really key to us at Idean. Idean is a global design agency with now, I believe, 22 studios across the world. Here is a picture of the Idean studio team. We're all we're pretending to be our favourite animals. We don't always look that weird. What do? We help organisations to be human-centred. We try and always create purposeful impact. So what is inclusive design? We feel that inclusive design is the design of mainstream products and services that can be used and enjoyed by as many people as possible. The key word in there being enjoyed. It's not about just making sure that someone can access a service, it's about making sure that's a brilliant service experience for everyone. So we really believe that a disability is a mismatch between a person's ability and their environment. And the key word in there being environment. Environment is something that you can change, we can improve, we can make it better. We can improve the kind of services and products that are out there that we're building. So, as I'm sure many of you know, inclusive design is not new. The approach has been developing for many years. Government is doing it very well. Obviously, government has a mandate and we need to be doing it. The private sector, unfortunately, sucks. We don't have a mandate to be doing it and we're not doing it a lot. We're not obliged to be making those services accessible. So I'm sure many people in this room are very familiar with some of these posters, the do's or don'ts around designing for different disabilities. One thing that comes up quite often is people will try and understand what is the difference between accessibility and inclusive design. So we experience internally and when working with clients that many people understand what accessibility might mean, but don't quite grapple with what inclusivity is. So I think people mainly know around accessibility because of like web content accessibility guidelines, but we really see inclusive design as being more about that mindset, being able to think about how to make that service experience the best for everyone, not just making it accessible for everyone. So therefore, accessibility is a basic requirement we see. Inclusivity is more of a mindset. So designing inclusively benefits the majority, not only the minority. However, another hands up exercise. Put your hands up if you know of any services that force you to make a phone call at some point in the process. Yeah, I think most of us are putting our hands up because we probably have to dealing with utility companies. They're probably one of the worst culprits, unfortunately. But we've also got Oyster up here. So one example is if you want to get refunded by Oyster, you have to call up. And that's a classic trick from service companies, making sure that they're putting that added friction in there. It's a lot more effort for us to be calling up. However, what does that mean for someone if they're really unconfident kind of using the phone, or if they are deaf or anything like that? So has anyone else got any other examples around kind of services that are making you have to pick up the phone?
Cancel a subscription for New York Times.
Cancelling a subscription. Sorry.
Hospital appointment. Change.
It's okay, I'll repeat. So changing a hospital appointment, exactly. And we had cancelling a subscription for New York Times. Cancelling things or signing up for things is a common one where they make you do it.
I've got a really bad one.
Go for it.
Cancelling a Beer 52 subscription.
What's Beer
A
52?
beer company that sends you beers every month.
So it's that added friction that they think is okay to make you only use one channel, one touch point.
Replace your taxi card. So the taxi card scheme is for disabled people across London. You have to phone up if you need it replaced, or to change your name on it, anything like that.
So just to repeat back for anyone that didn't catch that, that's replacing your taxi card, meaning that you have to call up to be able to get that replaced. Any others?
I don't understand, I'm dyslexic, so I don't understand what content is on the FAQ and then you have to call up.
Yeah. So HMRC tax return, I'm sure that's a real pain point in the room right now with many people. Yep.
I went to a car park where you could only pay for your parking by phone.
Yeah, that's really started to crop up, paying only for car parking spaces with your phone. It's a nightmare. Okay, we've got a few more of these, so we'll come back to other people as well. Okay, so another kind of example, put your hand up if you know of any service counters that are not at a sensible height for maybe wheelchair users, those with dwarfism, or even shorter people like myself. Okay, I've got one example up here, the post office. My local post office, I've seen so many terrible interactions having to happen where the person behind the screen is having to get up, peer down, it doesn't quite work with the microphones anymore, so people can't hear each other, and it's just completely taking away any enjoyment that could have possibly be happening in that interaction. Has anyone else got any? Go for it.
Also hotel check-in desks.
Yeah, hotel check-in desks, absolutely.
Desks in many, paying desks in many shops where you wouldn't be able to wheel a wheelchair underneath, so it's basically the desk is straight instead of the desk going up with an indent for a wheelchair to fit under.
Yeah, so that was paying desks. I also think self-scanning as well is often at quite an odd height, whether you're very tall or very short or you're in a wheelchair. It's not easy to use.
Clothes shops, and then also where you return your clothes in the changing rooms.
Yeah, so that's returning your clothes in the changing rooms and where the rails are, how high they are, that sort of thing. Okay, go for it, one more.
Airport customs.
Yeah.
You're here anyway, average size, so it must be tremendous.
I mean, airport customs has got to be one of the worst service experiences for everyone, right? Constantly hopping around with one shoe on. So, one more. Put your hand up if you know of any services that are not easily used with a screen reader or have many hidden links. So I'm just going to describe what I mean by hidden links, just in case anyone in the room doesn't know what they are. So hidden links are when we probably do it quite a lot in emails, all of us. So if there's one thing that we take away from today is not doing any hidden links. So when you say, please find the Insight document here, and that's where you embed the link just in the here bit. So if you're using a screen reader, you're not going to be able to know exactly what you're clicking on there. It's just going to be here, and you don't know what's about to pop up. So the reason why I put LinkedIn up here, Molly Watts, fantastic speaker, has been here before. Highly recommend that you go and see some of her earlier talks. But she recently wrote a blog post about how bad LinkedIn is. I didn't realize how bad LinkedIn was for screen readers, but it's terrible. I don't know if anyone else has got any examples of other services that are particularly bad for this sort of thing. Yeah.
I bought my niece a gift voucher for a clothes shop that she really likes. It's an online service, and
anything like that, I couldn't use it. And I make websites for a living, and I couldn't use it. And it was really difficult. All I was trying to do was fill in a form to buy a gift voucher. I dread to think what that was like for somebody with a screen reader or something like that. I have used Marks and Spencer's websites before and found similar problems where they had a massive menu that just was impossible to navigate, even without a screen reader.
It always seems to be the services that you've maybe already paid for and they don't seem to really care too much more because you're not going to be spending more money on that bit, isn't it? Any others? Yeah.
A lot of voucher sites like Groupon and
Yeah.
Proud.
What's the main bit that's really bad about that?
So they're not all accessible by a screen reader. The links aren't well written, so they've got a lot of click here or see below. But also, as well as screen readers, they're not good for people who zoom in. So for me, I use a lower resolution. And when I go onto Groupon, there's a pop-up which is bigger than my screen, and I cannot possibly exit it.
Yeah.
But, yeah,
So that was, for anyone else that couldn't hear at the back, that was about kind of lower resolution and pop-ups being really bad on a lot of voucher sites. Okay. So we all know that all of these things are not okay. We've all got so many of these kind of almost war stories, annoying stories of terrible services that we're having to use. But why does it still happen? So unfortunately, inclusive design is still seen as an add-on, seen as a nice to have. It's like maybe we'll get round to later. I've been in meetings where it's like that, and it really aggravates me. So we know it's a huge market. It's estimated that in the UK, the purple pound is worth 212 billion. So that's a fair amount of spending power that you're completely missing out on if you're not thinking about designing inclusively. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the Purple Tuesday movement. It was a couple of months ago now, where it was a customer-facing kind of movement to try and make people more aware of the challenges and to inspire them to be designing more inclusively and thinking about their service experience, particularly within high street retail chains. It was really successful, and there's been lots of other things happening like this. However, there's still a huge lack of awareness. We're seeing it every day with the clients that we're kind of engaging with. So about 15% of the world's population lives with some sort of disability. In the UK, it's thought that 7 million people of a working age have a disability, and about 15% of the world's, and about 45% of adults over a state pension age in Great Britain are disabled. Now, I'm sure we're familiar with stats and facts like this, but unfortunately, these are the main things that enable us to get through to clients, is being able to say, look, it's this many people that are affected. It's not you thinking it's just people over here, it's everyone. Like, we need to be designing inclusively. So I'm now going to talk through 5 ways to help you to empower others to design inclusively. And these are really centered around some of the main arguments that we have clients kind of coming back with us. So the first thing we need to do is being able to embed an inclusive mindset within a team. So obviously we need to be kind of educating and engaging our stakeholders and our clients when we're doing this. But some of the main things that we see that they come back to us with are things like this. So again, I'm clearly a massive fan of the hands up thing. Put your hands up if you've heard this argument before. We don't have budget for that. Yeah, I think this one's the most common one. So our rebuttal against that, as we're trying to improve and encourage people to design inclusively, is if we don't have the budget, but can we really afford not to do it? So often organisations believe designing inclusively will cost more, so they don't do it. Arguably, it does at times. However, the impact of not doing it can have a huge negative impact on your brand. 3/4 of disabled people and their families have left a shop or a business because of poor customer service or a lack of disability awareness. So that's a large amount of people that you're letting come into your service, use your product to begin with, and then they're going to be leaving it. What about this argument? We can fix this later, let's just launch it now. Hands up if we've heard that one a few times. Right. So the thing that's so frustrating about this is if you make it inclusive from the start, you're going to be saving money in the long run. It costs so much more apparently 10 times more to be able to fix something that isn't inclusive from the beginning, especially when we're talking about kind of accessible code for screen readers and that sort of thing. So many organisations will tack inclusive or accessible design onto the end of a product, if at all, and it just costs so much more to do that. This is the one that really upsets me, and it just makes no sense. So hands up if you've ever heard this argument: they're not the user group we're trying to reach anyway. I mean, where to start with this one? So we've already done the kind of temporary impairment hands up approach. We all experience temporary impairments at points, but also with longer life expectancies and an aging population, we're going to have more impairments and disabilities. Everyone will be continuing to experience temporary impairments, and as we've previously stated, 34% of the UK adult population have an impairment. So that's not a small amount of people that are not able to use your service or product. So inclusive design is better design for everyone. The second thing that we need to be doing is making sure that we understand all of our potential users and their contexts. So the main thing here is when we're designing kind of personas and we're designing for various kind of user groups and user segments, is thinking about what is the true representative demographic within that may have impairments or disabilities. So hands up whoever's created a set of personas. We know previously there's quite a lot of designers in the room, okay? So keep your hand up if it's included personas with an impairment or disability. Okay, quite a few. But there will have been a few people that might have put their hand back down. And we've all been there, unfortunately. It's quite commonplace. It's something that we're trying to change internally, a large amount of idea at the moment. But it's easy for people to slip into this kind of category. So building true representative personas and having them kind of on the backlog and always making sure that you're using them and thinking about designing for lots of different contexts and situations will help us to be designing inclusively. So we can find out what impairment prevalence there is by going on to kind of different Gov websites. So we can always be looking up exactly what kind of users might be coming towards this service. The other thing that we can do to kind of break down barriers and get people to really understand what inclusive design is about and why it's important are simulation tools. So simulation tools are a great way of building empathy. However, I can't stress this enough, they always have to be used with a pinch of salt. So the biggest concern for me around empathy tools, whilst they're brilliant at people suddenly having that aha moment at times, especially when using kind of vision simulation glasses and things like that, the problem is that, especially if we're designers when trying this, we can start to feel a little bit more attached to our own experience of what it's like to be visually impaired than listening to the research and insights and working with someone who is visually impaired consistently. So a simulation is just a simulation. It's not a true representative experience of what it's like to live with an impairment, but they have their place and they can be very good at making people suddenly go, oh, okay, that's why we need to be doing this. Other things like Chromevox are a great way of just quickly understanding what it might be like to be using a screen reader, and the same with Totally. So third thing that we can be doing to be designing more inclusively is design with our users and not just for them. So when we've started to create our kind of propositions and concepts, we need to further co-create these ideas with all of our different user segments, and this will help to make sure we're meeting their needs. So this is quite a strong statement of vouchers don't pay bills. There was a fantastic talk done at IDEA a couple of months ago. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Service Lab, it was part of that. And a person called Edward Richards from Cutting Edge came in and spoke to us. And he was saying, whilst it's brilliant, there's so much kind of co-creation that is now happening with people with disabilities and making sure that we're bringing them into the process, he's fed up of being brought in just for co-design sessions, given vouchers, and then being on his way. There's a real lack of us actually being able to employ designers with disabilities and having them throughout the process, rather than just bringing them in at key points and then letting them go away. There's a lot more value that can be added by having someone throughout the process. So the fourth thing is about evaluating our ideas with users. So there's lots of tools out there to help us to assess how accessible a product or service is, and these are useful to a certain extent, but it's important to always be testing these with users that have varying levels of impairments or disabilities, and really importantly, in the context that they might actually be using them in. So one way in which we've been doing this is we've been working with Centrica. There's a few people from the Centrica team in the audience I can see. And we've been working with Centrica to improve their identification and payment services. And we've ensured and worked with them closely to make sure that each new addition to the pattern library is always consistently tested against accessibility standards. And Centrica always works with RNIB and MenCap to ensure that our user testing groups are included to have participants who are blind, visually impaired, or neurotypical. We also have designers across the organisation who will have impairments and disabilities on varying scale, and they'll be able to help us evaluate the designs as we go. The fifth thing that we need to be doing is continuously iterating and updating. So to create any good service or product, the key is continuous iteration or improvement. Many of us know that as designers in the room. But when we're creating a service or product that's going to be used with accessible technology, things change rapidly. We need to always be updating them and checking back in. We can't just create it and think that would be it forever and it's accessible and we've done a great job, pat on the back. We need to make sure that it continually works with different kind of integrations. I think there's going to be a lot more on this sort of subject later on. So one way that we've been doing this at Idean is Smarty. Smarty is a new SIM-only mobile network that we launched last year, and it's built to be simple and honest. And we ensured from the start to be inclusive in the way that we approach gender labels. So we decided we didn't need to ask them. This is kind of a backwards and forwards that we had for quite a while to really prove that we really didn't need to be asking this. We don't. And we ensure that our design patterns will always be including inclusive links. So, to summarise, first we need to be embedding an inclusive mindset within our team, educating our stakeholders and having those kind of difficult conversations with clients. We need to be using kind of empathy tools to get people to understand what it might be like and understand why it's so important to be doing this. We then need to be making sure that we understand all of our potential users and their context, and then be designing with them. We also need to be evaluating our ideas with users and continuously updating and iterating them to make sure that it doesn't just work from the beginning, but it will work for years to come. So, keep fighting the good fight. It's hard doing this internally. There's a few kind of supporters internally here tonight, but I'm sure it's a very difficult movement to try and create sometimes, and we will have to kind of create allies, which is why I've been such a kind of strong coming every week to this event. That's mainly it. So if I can open up to some questions, that'd be great.
Are the microphones turned on? Microphone turned on? Yep. Hands up if you've got a question.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. So my first question is, how do you deal with clients when they say they don't have the budget for this inclusive design?
So going back to that we don't have the budget kind of question, it's always looking at, well, going to the numbers straight away generally. If they're talking about budget, we need to go back with budget. So going back with, right, how many users of this service will actually be affected by this not being an inclusive product, and being able to put some metrics in front of them.
Okay. But don't you do it in the beginning, like while you're setting KPIs, but it's only afterwards?
That's a good question. I think we should always be doing it from the beginning. We've had certain clients where we've tried to get them to understand this at the start, and we've had to kind of strategically sit back and wait for key moments to be able to make the case. So one in particular, we were working around a retirement product, and obviously retirement product, there's obviously going to be a large amount of people using that service that will maybe be visually impaired. It's going to be a lot more of an older generation. Yet they weren't quite seeing this right from the start. So we had to wait until quite a long time through the product into the research stage when it was clear that we could show that someone had come in, they were using their service or a kind of prototype of their service. And I could point out that at least 4 of 10 participants had what we call an essential tremor. And then we had a large amount of kind of radio buttons and things like that. So it was just by being able to actually have a video of this is a person that is struggling with your service, this is why we need to be thinking about designing inclusively.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll let Raf take that side.
Hey Charlie, thank you very much for the talk, very interesting. So I was picking up on your point about the temporary disability thing, which is a great example. I've used that myself in the past. I wonder if you ever talk to your clients about the fact that whilst like today I might not have any disabilities, maybe 10 years down the line I might. So the kind of like, as you get older you naturally develop disabilities sometimes. I wonder if you ever use that as an angle to talk to people about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the kind of aging population angle is always a strong one. Like whatever users you've got now, if you're wanting to keep retention, those people are going to get older. There's not much that you can do about it. So how do you continually cater to their needs?
Thank you.
Cool.
Can you pass that?
Hey, yeah, just had a quick question. I suppose, sort of from a product perspective, I suppose you're always sort of prioritising what do we work on next, and it's usually kind of commercial, what users want to do. I suppose I'm kind of at a stage where it's kind of looking at accessibility quite heavily, and I just wondered if you've got any kind of tips on, I know we're not in a perfect place where I am, but I suppose it's how do you kind of prioritise, say, an accessibility backlog of stuff. I suppose, is there any kind of techniques or tips? Appreciate there's, you want to get it right for everyone, and you can get users in and so on, but just kind of keen to understand, is there kind of any tips or just from experience how you might prioritise, say, an accessibility backlog where you've got issues and you want to kind of get them to a much better place than they are?
So I think 2 main things around that. The first one being knowing when to pick your battles. So picking off, especially if we're at the beginning of a relationship with a client, we want to pick off a battle that is going to be clear and an easier win so that we can show and get a little bit of a chink in their armour of what their barriers are against kind of designing inclusively. And the second part around that, say the question again for me, 1 sec.
I suppose it's like if you've got a backlog of accessibility and sorry. Yeah, so I suppose, imagine you've kind of done an accessibility test and people have kind of said, you've had users in and so on. I suppose I just wondered if you have any tips on how you might kind of prioritise, I suppose, an accessibility backlog, those things that you just need to do to cater towards people with all sorts of different types of impairments and so on. And if you've had any kind of tips where, or sort of, I don't know, techniques where you kind of help prioritise, whether it's, right, do you do it by data and say, right, we think, the population of the UK has this impairment most prominently, so we should prioritise on that. It's just a tricky one, I suppose. So
I think it's that mix of being able to make a good news story early on so you can get the buy-in versus being able to look at the data and metrics and work out how many users are we going to be able to help by doing this. And I think it's that as you go through a client relationship, it's working out which one's kind of more important. At the beginning, it's always about making sure you can get that good news story. As soon as that kind of goes out, then the other parts will hopefully follow.
Because I can help with that as well.
Yeah.
So you want to think about the impact that a bug has and potentially also how easy it is to fix it. It makes much more sense to fix the high impact, easy to fix things before tackling the low impact things that will take a long time. You've also got things like, because if you make this fix, is this going to affect just one page or just one part of the journey, or is it part of a design system and it will affect every page? So I think for a prioritisation point of view, it makes sense to think about impact.
Yes, but while you're quite right in saying that the battle with the public sector is being won, what I'm having trouble with is persuading clients that they are actually part of the public sector. Because I was talking with a health company just last month that deals with providing patients with information about security, about I mean, there's lots and lots of things about providing information about healthcare apps. It was, as far as I'm concerned, it was completely public sector, but it was a privately owned company, and the person I was speaking to, who I won't name, was saying, no, we don't have to worry about that because we're private sector, we're not public sector, and so it's just really trying. How do you have any tips on persuading people who really should see themselves as public sector, agreeing that they're public sector? I mean, because that definition is so blurry.
Yeah, I think it's quite similar to that service and product that I was speaking about earlier that was all around kind of retirement. Whilst it was a private company, they're very much getting very close to what a public sector service kind of looks like. And we had a real battle continually with them not seeing that it was their duty and trying to open their eyes up. The only way of really doing that was being able to show them on video, this is a real person that has an essential tremor trying to use your service. Just being able to get videos, quotes, or having people in the room, bringing people on to actually look at kind of usability testing or anything like that. They can't say no when there's a person called Betty that's struggling to use their service. Trying to make it as human and as real as possible seems to be the only way that we've really kind of made any progress with that. Yeah.
I would also just to add there that the private sector is also covered by the equality duty as well. If you're a service provider and you've not made it accessible and haven't provided a reasonable adjustment, then you could still get in trouble. The public sector has to preemptively think about it. The private sector doesn't necessarily have to preemptively think about it, but they're still covered by these Equality Act. Question over here.
Thank you for your really good presentation, and I've taken notes of your 5 main points. The problem is I work for government departments, and we are going through a major internet change at the moment, refresh. The problem is, even though we've got, we've done the user research, we've got the evidence, we've got everything there, it's the culture change that's going to be the thing. Because, for instance, our internal comms say, well, business needs override user needs, and we have to have a compromise. Even if it said we've got like 7,000 people, if you're like, well, you worked out something like only 250 people have got impairments. So what? There's something like that. We have to compromise, and that's what we're fighting against. And they hold, in terms of politics, they hold the purse strings kind of thing. So it is really, really difficult. But we are persevering, but it is knackering, basically.
Absolutely. I mean, we struggle with mindset change around clients, but we're also internally always still kind of changing mindsets. And we're trying at the moment internally to think about what are easy ways that we can disrupt the kind of normal or regular sort of design process that all designers are kind of quite used to now. And what tools can we put in place, what little reminders along the journey can we be to be encouraging people to be thinking about inclusive design as we go.
So the client you were talking about, did they reach out to you because they had a redesign in progress, or did they reach out for accessibility in particular?
No, they wanted to design a service that was going to provide information about kind of retirement and things like that.
Right. So how do you deal with clients that have absolutely no reason to redesign their website, but have an obligation to make their current website accessible, and might have very low budgets and absolutely no intention to revisit their website for a long time? How would you go about and convince that crowd to actually make some efforts and investment into that?
So I think the first thing is showing them what it looks like for someone to be struggling to use that service. So are we at the point that we think that they've already built the website, or are we trying to encourage them to build the website? They've built something, but it's
so
not
they
good.
already have a website that's definitely not accessible.
So we're working on like, right, we need to encourage them to be able to improve it, and why. So I think it's going to, picking up on a few of these kind of different questions, is around looking at the metrics, being able to understand kind of how many users are potentially absolutely not able to access this service currently. That's probably going to be quite powerful to them, like, right, okay, we probably should do something to be able to let these people access our service. And then it's also being able to look at, can we bring someone in to be able to use it in front of them? So again, I think the only way that we've really managed to get through to clients is that really human to human, like, this is another human struggling to do something. Most people have empathy. They're going to feel like, I can probably do something to make that better. That's very hard to argue with. The numbers are one thing, and I think it works for many clients that are kind of really focused on their budget and things like that. But human to human kind of interaction and building that empathy, I think that's the key.
Thank you.
I think we've got time for another couple of questions until Raf, do you want to microphone there and I'll...
Hi, also the Equalities Act, formerly the Disability Discrimination Act, can be your friend. I did a job, it was a few years ago. Ironically, we were producing a training video teaching staff of, and I'm going to name them, it was Arcadia Group, teaching them about the Equalities Act, and they decided they didn't have the budget to put subtitles on it. Seriously. Despite our protestations, they said that it didn't affect them because they didn't have they couldn't identify any staff with hearing impairments, so they felt that they didn't need to do it. Anyway, we made the video went out, and a member of staff, because it was a training video, they said they were being discriminated against because they were missing out on a training opportunity. They complained to their union, and they had to get compensation paid to them, and they were made to make another version of the video with subtitles specifically for that member of staff. So again, it cost them multiple times what it would have had they just done it in the first place. So if you gen up on the Equalities Act, then that gives you something you can actually, and I put it as, for every job I do now, I put saying that, the Equalities Act states that this is something that you should do.
That's a really good thing to have in the back pocket. That also sounds like a ridiculously hard client to be working with.
It's Philip Green.
Increasingly, agencies will cut corners to win projects. So how do you approach accessibility at a pitching stage? I think the talk's been amazing in terms of during an engagement, but before you win the project, how do you approach it? What do you say?
This is something that we're battling with internally as well. And we're still working out exactly how to do that. One thing that we're definitely looking at doing at the moment is probably not shouting out the words accessibility at any point in the pitching stage, because from our experience so far, clients are very much like just stepping back from it. So we are playing a long-term strategic waiting game, I would say, unfortunately. We're not going out and being able to win work with our kind of inclusive mindset, but it's something that we're being able to educate our existing clients to be able to slowly make sure that we're moving towards a more inclusive product and service with them. But yeah, continual battle.
Brilliant. I think that is all the time we have for questions. But can you put your hands together and say a massive, massive thank you to Charley. So we've now got a 30-minute break. If you want to make your way next door, there should be lots more drink and lots more food. Please be back here by 8:15 for our brilliant second talker. See you soon. we'll get ready for the second talk. So really excited to have Mike with us today. So I've kind of known of Mike on Twitter for quite a long time. He's actually just been on his honeymoon, and he's passing through London on the way back to Canada. So really excited to have Mike speaking here. He's going to be talking about open source and the benefits and challenges with regard to accessibility. So give a big round of applause to Mike Gifford.
Thank you. First of all, I'm really impressed at the number of people who've come out on a Thursday evening, on a cold Thursday evening here in London, and I'm really happy to be able to present in front of so many people from various different sectors here in the UK. So first of all, do people know what Drupal is? Do people know what open source is? Okay, excellent. That helps. Anyone want a quick explanation on either? Yes. Okay, so open source is software that is free to use, modify, and distribute, essentially. And Drupal is a content management system, and it runs. It's sort of like WordPress, but it runs about 3% of the internet. And also, in terms of my talks, I prefer questions and answers than presentations. So hopefully they'll keep those questions going, and hopefully there'll be times for some interesting questions from leading from my presentation. So this is me. I am president of Open Concept, which is a web development company in Ottawa. We are a Drupal development firm. I'm also the Drupal 8 core accessibility maintainer. There's actually another maintainer for Drupal 8, Andrew McPherson. He's up in Edinburgh, so it's unusual for the two of us to be in the same country at the same time. But Andrew's done a lot of wonderful stuff with Drupal as well, and hopefully at some point in the future he'll come down and have an opportunity to be part of this meetup as well. I'm also a co-founder of Aliyao, which is an accessibility unconference or an accessibility event similar to this in Ottawa. It's just a lot smaller because Ottawa is a little bit smaller than London. My company is a B Corp, so we're a certified B company. We try and go off and be a triple bottom line company, try and be good for the planet. We also do a lot of work around accessibility as part of our mandate to try and make the world better, not just make a lot of money. Not that we make a lot of money, but and finally, I'm an amateur photographer, and I take a lot of pictures, including pictures like this one here of a monkey that was hanging out in Sri Lanka. For people who are low vision or blind, all of my slides will include monkeys because I took a lot of them, and I did this slide presentation on the plane, and I had not a lot of visual resources, but I did have a lot of pictures of monkeys. So the first thing I want to go off and say is that people have views about open source as being sort of fringy and something that is not something that it's a risky thing to take on. And I think that it used to be the case 20 years ago that was when we were first involved with open source software that was the case. But at this point, almost every organization around the world is using open source software in one form or another. Almost every website has some form of open source software that they're using, whether it's a framework like Bootstrap that they're using to drive their website. Maybe it's the language that the software is running in, like PHP or .NET now is open source. And there's a lot of giants that are now getting involved in open source because it has proved to be so successful. So does everyone know what GitHub is? So GitHub is a big open source repository of information, and Microsoft just bought GitHub for I don't know how many billions of dollars, and the largest contributor of open source on GitHub of all the world is Microsoft. Microsoft is now promoting open source just like they're promoting accessibility. They're in the last 2 years, they've really sort of turned around a lot of what they've done and are doing a lot more to go off and to address both accessibility and open source because they see some real advantages to that. One of the things that accessibility does is it tends to go off and drive down the cost, not just because it's free for people to use, modify, and download and distribute, but it's software that allows you to, if you find a pattern that works, you can distribute it to other people. You can work with a community of people, so you're not necessarily going to be the only one who's maintaining a piece of software and having to push that forward. You've got a whole community you can draw on to try and find answers to a particular problem you're running into. So it's something that in many ways helps to distribute the costs of managing any piece of software. Does anyone know about the bus? Was it the bus factor or the lottery factory? For you might have a great site that you developed, or you've got a really kick-ass team of developers. But if one of them gets hit by a bus or wins a lottery, you might be really stuck. And if you're building with a community, you're distributing that out. So there's more people, more geniuses you can draw on to go off and to make sure that your product is more viable over the long term. And a lot of organizations are seeing that. And the other thing is just that software moves so quickly, and the internet has really propelled the rate with which change happens. And it's hard to how many people have played with the JavaScript front end implementations, React or Angular? It's turning everything upside down in a lot of ways. These frameworks are challenging a lot of our existing paradigms, and this is something that's not. I mean, it's relatively new, but 10 years ago was when the iPhone was just was first sort of commercially viable, and you think about our society now. And does anyone here not have a smartphone in their pocket? Okay, so it's we're looking at in 10 years' time, perhaps it'll be augmented reality or virtual reality that we're looking at and looking at how this is so just the rate of change is so fast, and trying to keep up with this requires us to use libraries and to work together in order to go off and to try and make sure that we're able to accomplish the task we're looking for. Let's see. So yes, all the cool kids are doing it. So I've got a monkey crawling up a vine here. Accessibility is advanced through people sharing their knowledge. Much like events like this, accessibility events, our knowledge is advanced by sharing what we know and learning from each other. The open source community in most cases is very much like this. People look at what they've done, they look at examples, they find what works, they find what doesn't, they talk to each other at conferences and other events, and they learn through being engaged in the community. Open source has disrupted a lot of industries. So, and the accessibility industry is just one other industry that has been disrupted or is in the process of being disrupted by open source. Has anyone heard about Axe Core? So Axe Core is a really neat library that was started by DQ Systems, that's open source and is being used for a lot of automated testing tools, but it's also built into Google Lighthouse. Do people know what Google Lighthouse is? Google Lighthouse is a great tool that allows you to do a quick audit of a quick review of your website with Axe Core, and they've got a limited number of tests that they use to try and evaluate that. But Google is taking the work that DQ Systems has done, embedded that into Google Lighthouse, and is then trying to provide ways to leverage those results in a way to go off and make it easier for people to understand how they can improve accessibility, and also how they can improve the search engine optimization and performance. They're trying to bundle it into a few things so that it becomes part of a regular process that people can go off and make the experience better for their users by going off and using these tools and generating these reports to make it easier. So that's, Axe Core is open source. There's also other tools that are released on GitHub that are being used widely in the community. There's a color contrast or the contrast ratio tool that's a quite good way to go off and evaluate whether or not your color contrast is effective or not. It allows you to, with the color contrast ratio tool in GitHub, put in both the RGB color definitions, hex color definitions, and the HSL definitions, whatever the heck that is, but various other color definitions that allow you to go off into that you might want to use in your CSS to define your website. So there's also a great one called Tangaroo that allows you to go off and to take an image, and if your color contrast is, sorry, if you take your color contrast combination and you put them in there, and you're not sure how to go off and meet your WCAG 2.0 AA requirements, the Tangaroo gives you a whole bunch of various color options that are very close to the one you're working for. So if a client gives you a color, a style guide that doesn't quite work, you can go off and often find a color that's close enough, and they might not know that you're actually not, you're varying from what they've given you. So you can use Tangaroo for that. There's also things like Pally, which is another accessibility checking tool, and the BBC has an accessibility tool that's up on GitHub. You can also find things like there's an alley style guide that was developed by Carrie Fisher, who I think designed this shirt. This is an Alley Cats t-shirt that I'm wearing, and so there's that. There's the Alley projects. There's a lot of stuff that's being done with open source or with open documentation, trying to go off and get people to share and collaborate with each other in order to go off and to make accessibility easier and to get more people on board with a best practice. So one of the, I think that the accessibility industry has to rethink a few things. And one of the problems is that people tend to work in isolation. And there's a lot of people in organizations who've been doing accessibility work for a long time and know a particular set of tools, but don't necessarily have the time or energy to be able to keep up with the latest area standards, with WCAG 2.1, with the new dynamic elements that are added in. They're like just trying to keep up with the changes of the technology is difficult, especially when people are always getting pressured to do more with less. So trying to go off and work together is going to be quite important in order to try and find ways to be able to work, to accomplish more for less. Many organizations are using open source tools like Drupal, but unfortunately, a lot of organizations don't get involved. They go off and use the tools, and then they walk away. Hopefully it sets up and it accomplishes their immediate requirements, and then they might, if there's a problem with it they run into, they'll go off and hack the code that they've got. Because it's open source, they can do that, but they never contribute anything back to the open source community to try and make that original library better. There's a case study I like to go off and raise with Drupal 8. I guess I think it was like 4 years ago, a guy named Vincenzo Rabano from Italy was a high school student who was working on Drupal. He was blind, still is, and he ran into a bunch of errors and started to get involved in the Drupal community and posting issues and bugs in Drupal. And as an individual, in the year before he started university, he was able to go off and be more involved and more active in addressing accessibility issues in Drupal 8. He's more involved than all of the governments in the world combined. And given the number of organizations that use Drupal, a lot of them are government, including the White House, including the Queen's website, including the Ontario website. Like a lot of websites use Drupal, but there hasn't been a tendency of people giving back. So if one single individual as a student can contribute more than all of the governments in the world combined, there's a structural problem that needs to be addressed. And I think that we have to also try and make sure that we're doing what we can to keep up with the best practices and improve our best practices, because the assistive technology and the browsers and the standards are changing, and so the best practices need to keep up with them, and we need to be actively involved as a community to try and see that we're doing more with that. Another thing is all software is built with libraries, and we don't often think about this often enough, but there are layers and layers of software involved in driving the web. And if you know, so much of the accessibility industry has been focused on site-specific fixes. And if you're fixing a problem for your particular website, then the next time there's an update to the software that you're using, whether there's a security release or there's a new version of the module that has some additional features that you're looking for, whenever you update that software library, then you're going to lose all of those enhancements and changes that you've made, or it's going to cost you a lot to go off and to reapply all the patches that you've created. So, you know, trying to get people to think about those libraries and to think about how to go off and fix the problem at the source. How do we try and make sure that we're not simply going and addressing our own needs, but if we can think a little bit larger and think about the ways that we can go off and fix the systems that we're using and that we're leveraging for our websites. There are, you know, these libraries are also evolving and changing. How do we try and make sure that those libraries and the people who are involved in creating them are aware about accessibility and making sure that we are making that they're making good decisions as new features are being added. So, you know, being involved in those communities is quite an important step. So I've been very active in the Drupal community for the last decade, and there's been surprised at the amount of funding that is going towards to site-specific fixes. Like the whole accessibility industry is geared to fixing individual websites, and whether it's doing audits or remediation of individual websites. There's almost no funding or resources looking at the larger challenge of the systems that we're using, whether it's tools like Drupal or things like Bootstrap that are used by millions of websites, or, you know, CK Editor. There's so many libraries that are using to drive the web, but there's no money going to try and support the accessibility improvements and refinements in these general libraries. If we were able to go off and to have testing and involvement to make sure that those those tools are that we're able to test that, I think we'd be much better off. Because if a developer is starting with an accessible tool set, then it's much easier for them to take that tool and to apply it, and instead of having to go off and to take an inaccessible tool, learn what the barriers are with that, and then fix those problems before they apply it in their website. It's a much easier way for people to learn how to do things right if they have a good example to start from. So there's definitely lots of challenges with open source, like with any software library. There are one of the big challenges is dealing with critical mass. There's lots of software out there that is open source. GitHub is filled with all kinds of open source libraries that people have set up. A lot of software doesn't have critical mass to be supported, and that's not just open source software. Software is complicated. You need to go off and to have people who are developers and users. You need to have the economic and cultural movement behind that, so that you're able to ensure that your software that you're building your site on is going to be there in 3 or 5 years time. If you're developing your website on an interesting looking project that's got 5 developers in it, well, they might get hired by Google next week, and you're stuck with a piece of software that nobody's maintaining, and you're stuck trying to go off and to juggle with how do you deal with the security updates, how do you deal with those feature enhancements and all the bugs that come out. So that's certainly one challenge that's there with open source. procurement in many organizations is difficult as well. A lot of organizations don't know how to procure free software. How do you buy something that's free? It takes, what are the legal issues around that? It's something that a lot of organizations have been struggling with. I don't think that it's that difficult, but it certainly is a change of mindset when people are used to buying a product as opposed to supporting a service. So there's changes on that front. I think that's the more you can look to a precedent, the more you can try and find ways where other government departments have been able to leverage open source, the better it is. It's been nice to go off and to see that so many government agencies are signing on to things like the Open Government Partnership, and looking at the work that the GDS has been doing to both talk about open source and release code under open source. President Obama, when he was in office, talked about a shared first mandate, trying to go off and to make the defaults of the software that they develop open for people to go off and to leverage. So this is, again, there's ways that we can make it easier for people to go off and to adopt it and overcome some of the shortfalls for people who are trying to explore using more collaborative software. I think that a lot of people, when they're getting involved in any software problem, tend to think of it as a lot of developers aren't very keen to ask others for help. They're people who want to often sort of solve the problem on their own and fix the puzzle. And I think that with a lot of open source software, it's useful to think about this as a community effort. And so if the documentation isn't very good, maybe get involved in trying to improve the documentation. If there's, or ask questions, like even if there's something that you should be able to get working, but you can't find a way to make it work, that asking questions and posting bugs is a way to go off and make it easier for other people who may not necessarily understand that there's a like for every one person who doesn't understand it and posts a question, there's 10 people who saw that same problem and just never bothered to go off and to post a question. They moved on to another set of code or threw up their hands in frustration or just handed it on to somebody else to address. There are I think that we, back when I started my business 20 years ago, the web was something that you could conceivably go off and manage as an individual or a small team. But now the web is so complicated. You've got so many different roles, and just the growth of the user research, usability spectrum is just it's huge. And 20 years ago there wasn't as much of a it wasn't as complicated. Sites were not expected to go off and have a unique designer who has experience with usability, and we're not comparing ourselves to Apple so trying to go off and realize that accessibility has also gotten more complicated, and that we can't necessarily solve all these problems on our own. We need to be able to draw on other people with their expertise. And fortunately, with an open source community, you actually have other people you can reach out to. You can be involved in the discussion forums, whether it's on Slack, or Rocket Chat, or in the issue queues. There's ways that you can go off and engage with others to try and get the answers you're looking for. And often you'll get a response in a fairly prompt manner. So not always, but often. Yeah, user experience is changing, the browsers are changing, and we need as much help as we can to go off and be able to implement these. How many people are using automated tools in their testing structure? They're quite handy, but it's something that if you can tie in tools like Axe Core into your development structure and actually have your developers have a red light when new accessibility issues start popping up, it's something that you can, the earlier you can go off and identify an accessibility problem, the less expensive it's going to be. So how do you make sure that the developers know that they've added a new problem with a commit? How do you make sure that they get that red flag so that you're not having to wait till it gets to a QA person to go off and to do the evaluation? You've got a bot that's able to go off and to count the number of errors the simple errors, the ones that an automated tool like AxeScore can go off and generate. And any of the automated accessibility tools, I mean, they're good. They need to be used and built into a general structure of how you're evaluating your websites. But I think that the GDS did a survey, and I think it was 25%, 30% was the top or something like that. Like there's really not that many. Like it's certainly not the majority of accessibility errors that are caught by any of the auditing tools that are out there right now. But it's worthwhile trying to catch that 30% of errors that can be identified by the better automated accessibility tools. So this is a picture of a monkey stealing a water bottle. Very feisty little monkey. Open source is about community. It's about trying to go off and build a commons around a particular piece of software, a particular chunk of intellectual property. And if people are just taking from that commons, then they're going to be suffering, we're all going to suffer the tragedy of the commons. We need to find ways to give back so that we're not like this cheeky monkey that's stealing the water bottle from the the thirsty tourist. I think that there's lots of ways for people to get involved and to contribute back. Some of that is in terms of actual technical skills, whether it's writing bug fixes or even submitting submitting bugs to these issue queues. Part of it's also looking to write documentation, be able to be an advocate, to make things easier for people to understand, to summarize issues. There's lots of ways that people of a range of different skills can be involved in order to make these accessibility products, these open source products more accessible. There's lots that can be done, and most people don't take the time to do that and don't work it into their daily operations and daily workflow, so that when they run into an issue that they actually take the time right there and then to go off and to report the issue or to find the bug in the issue queue for the library that they're using. But if we can build it into our workflow, it's something that will save us time in the long run. Right now, Drupal is the most accessible CMS out of the blocks. It's the most accessible open source content management system for sure. WordPress is coming along quickly, and I am very biased, but I have yet to find somebody else go off and tell me that there's another open source or another enterprise content management system that is more accessible than Drupal. That being said, we've got a long ways to go, and it's trying to build in accessibility by default takes a lot of work and a lot of time. But Drupal keeps changing and evolving, and there's new features that are being added all the time. Drupal 9 will be coming out in 2020, and trying to go off and deal with a whole flood of new features that'll be added to make it easier for people to go off and to use and modify. It took, in order to go off and to achieve that, it did take a bunch of tenacious volunteers in order to go off and to make that better. That there's for Drupal 8, I think there's over 400 people who contributed to the issue queue over the lifespan of the project, and a lot of companies invested quite a lot of time to go off and to make that better, including Open Concept, of course. But I think that it also took leadership from the top. That Dries, who's the founder of Drupal, has been quite active or quite open and talking about accessibility. There's other people in the leadership team who've also been very involved in trying to go off and to make it a priority. And it does take leadership from the top to go off and to make it important for everyone throughout the chain to go off and to see this as something that's important to them. And having technical people is important as well. People who understand those new technologies. People heard about the problems with Gutenberg and accessibility. It was a fairly big deal this fall for people in the WordPress community, and still a big deal. And I think one of the problems with that is that there's a shift to JavaScript front end, and there's not enough accessibility people who know JavaScript. And this is the case in the Drupal community as well. There aren't enough people who know accessibility, who are also kick-ass JavaScript people. We need as accessibility or as open source communities, we need people who have skills in both areas, and we don't have enough of those. Yeah, we need to do work on WCAG 2.1. We've done a lot of work on ATAG. Do people know what ATAG is? ATAG is the Authoring Tool Accessibility Guidelines. It's a great document that outlines ways that a CMS can be used as both as something that people who have disabilities should be able to use. That's part A of ATAG, but also should help people go off and create more accessible content. So content authors should be helped by their content management system to produce more accessible content. And I don't think there's any other content management system that's done as much to go off and to include ATAG into the framework of its core implementation. This is a monkey sitting on some blocks. And I think that again, looking at if you have building blocks that you can trust, it also helps. As people who've looked at accessibility, if you don't know how a system is built, if you have to evaluate every page uniquely, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to go off and to do that. If you can know that there's a system that's used to create various different forms, you can evaluate one form and then know that all of the other forms on the website are probably produced in the same way. And so you don't have to evaluate each page uniquely. You can go off and look at the elements and the pieces that are generated by the system and be able to build from that. So yeah, having trustworthy blocks that you can evaluate once and build on is really quite useful. I also really advocate for content management systems and other tools to have a public issue queue to talk about accessibility issues. Again, I've talked about GitHub earlier. I really like GitHub in a lot of ways. They don't have a public issue queue for accessibility issues. So how do you know that there's a problem with their site that has been reported by somebody else? For the longest time, JAWS didn't have a public issue queue either. They do now in the last year, but how do you know that the issue that you're having is with JAWS, or is it a problem that you're having with your code? If you don't have a public issue queue, you can't know whether or not it's your problem or a problem that's generally known in the community. So having that open issue queue is a really important piece of having building blocks that you can rely on in order to go off and evaluate them and know what is your problem specific to your code and your process, and what's a general problem that affects everyone. So these are monkeys picking bugs off of each other, because that's what they spend a lot of time doing. And just like these monkeys, there's a lot of bugs in software, and we can't forget that there's bugs in software. There's even with more sophisticated testing tools and systems, people will produce bugs, and it will there'll be things that will be overlooked even with the most comprehensive testing infrastructure. So having people look at and evaluate those bugs, having issue queues, and having spaces for people to give feedback is quite important, and being able to open it up so that more people and more users can go off and get ideas from each other about how to improve the code is useful. Accessibility is a big problem. It's complicated, and we need to work together in order to go off and to start addressing these issues. There are certainly simple issues that we can do, and we know that they're easy to learn and can be applied broadly, and everyone should be working to do that. But there's complicated issues like using area in custom web forms that may be quite complicated, and that might be something that changes when area 1.2 gets released. So it takes a community of people to be able to keep up with the changes with accessibility. So with that, my Twitter handle is mgifford. Mike at Open Concepts, my email address. OpenConcept.ca is my address. You can see more of my issues in the issue queue for Drupal.org there as well. I'm not going to bother to read that out. And I've also got a whole bunch of pictures of monkeys and other things on Flickr, if you want to see those. I had to cut out over 100 different pictures of monkeys that I could not put in these slides. So, yes.
So we've got 10 minutes for questions. Hands up if you have a question. Oh, question for Jonathan.
Thanks, Alistair. Hey, Mike. So thank you. I love what you're doing.
Thank
we were chatting yesterday, so it's great. How much does it pain you that...
Not enough.
Drupal is about, what, 8% of websites?
Just 3%.
Just 3%. And WordPress is about 30%.
That's right.
Drupal is more accessible.
Yes.
So people are choosing the wrong CMS for accessibility.
Yes.
Number one, how much does it pain you? And number two, how do you persuade them that actually the choice of CMS is one of the most important choices they make for accessibility when they're creating a site?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't argue that Drupal is the right tool for all jobs. There are places where WordPress is completely appropriate and is something that should be promoted. For some things, there are some good accessible WordPress themes, and there's ways to make so many other systems accessible as well. Most systems think about accessibility as a theme layer problem, which is, again, something that Drupal hasn't done. We've looked at it as a system, and how do we make the system better? How do we make the APIs better? How do we make sure that when other modules call on Drupal, that they're going off and pulling, that the Drupal's giving them a good accessible default response from the code that's resulting from the page. So it's a different approach, but we do go off and evaluate for our clients what are the what their needs are, and so much of the time they want something that is simple to implement, and they don't have very complicated requirements, and accessibility is often not high on their priorities. People don't come to us because people come to us to build websites most of the time, and this has been a giant loss leader for us as a company to be able to build expertise and to get in front of people like this. But people don't pay us to go off into like we've had a few clients that need to have accessible websites and have come to us, like the Canadian National Institute of the Blind, Canada's version of the RNIB. But there aren't that many companies and organizations that really take it as a high enough priority. Even government clients who need sites to be accessible, it'll be one of many bullet points, and they will often have no way to go off and evaluate the accessibility of the work that any vendor provides. So how do our costs compare to the costs of Buddy down the street who knows nothing about accessibility but says, yeah, we can do accessible stuff for sure, right? So it's definitely a challenge. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
Hello. You mentioned Gutenberg.
Yes.
And just wondering what your opinions are of the issues they're having and what you're doing in the Drupal community better or to overcome those issues.
I think one of the...
Can you explain what Gutenberg is?
So Gutenberg is I'm not a WordPress developer. I've followed a few of the threads and I've been away on vacation for a month. So things may have changed in the last month. But the last I heard when I was looking into this, essentially the problem came down to Gutenberg is a back-end interface for administrators to go off and manage the website. And what the WordPress community, what Automatic wanted to be able to do was to be able to give the content authors a nice WYSIWYG for doing layouts, for creating a dynamic, fluid, flowy way to manage how your content is presented on the page so that they can compete with the Wix and the Squarespace and the other tools that are providing nice dynamic implementations. It's a good idea. I think that it will happen at some point. I think that they were pushed to go off and deliver Gutenberg earlier before it was ready because of sales timelines and budgets and trying to go off and there's only so much time that most organizations are able to go off and to sit on a product before they release it. And they had invested a lot in this implementation, and I think they needed to invest more in accessibility. And as I said earlier, they didn't have enough people who understood both JavaScript and accessibility, and that's something that where they fell on their sword, so to speak. And the Drupal community doesn't have enough people who understand both JavaScript and accessibility either. But we've got a community that's already more geared towards accessibility and have more people who actually understand it. And there's more commitment from the top to go off and make sure that accessibility is a priority in the products that we deliver. And that, again, wasn't part of the WordPress culture just yet.
Any other questions? We've got a hand over here.
Do you believe it's actually possible to have a WYSIWYG back office interface that delivers accessible front ends?
So we've done quite a lot with Drupal 8. We included CK Editor, which is a fairly basic WYSIWYG editor. It's not as complicated as what Gutenberg provided, but it's a fairly basic one. And I think that is actually quite accessible. IBM put a lot of work into trying to improve the accessibility of CK Editor at one point. And we did some evaluations on that when we were picking a WYSIWYG editor for the back end of Drupal. And it's quite good. In the testing that we did with users at the CNIB, one of the problems was that when blind authors were writing text in the WYSIWYG editor, the spacing it was harder for them to check the spacing. It was actually easier for them to use Markdown as a default way to go off and to create and manage the text, because they could control with more precision how the paragraphs were broken up. And so there's an issue which should be worked on within the CK Editor community to improve that. But the output is generally all right from CK Editor. One of the challenges of both the layout builder in Drupal and Gutenberg in WordPress is that they wanted to be able to position broader elements, and they wanted to be able to say, well, we want to move this block here over there, and this block there over there, and we don't have the language to be able to, and the patterns and the best practices for how to do this anywhere. There's nowhere on the web that has this is the definitive way to go off and to communicate to a blind user, or for that matter to a keyboard-only user, how to go off and manage and organize the content visually that you can just so easily do by dragging and dropping the content around in the text and having all the other blocks sort of automatically reload and shuffle around for them. This is a fixable problem, but we just have to work together on that, and nobody's investing any time and money into building that general best practice that we can all work towards and use, and that will be tested against various assistive technology to know that we can use this. Shopify does have a reasonably interesting one that's worth implementing, and there's a few others that are there, but it's pockets of activity that are done in isolation, and nothing that is necessarily a generalizable way to make sure that there's a discoverable way to organize and manage that kind of information. Is that?
Yeah. No, thank you.
Okay.
Question over here.
Hi, great talk. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I was thinking one thing on what you were saying then. The other day I found drag and drop, as in like the creature, a dragon, and that's like an accessible drag and drop thing for keyboard and for screen reader users.
Right.
It's just a simple list, but I think there could be some principles there that could be interesting to look into for CMS.
Yeah.
And then, other random side note, you mentioned earlier about encouraging developers to use Axe Core. Is there anything else you suggest?
Tons of things. But just in terms of the drag and drop, in Drupal 7, the solution that we implemented that we've kept with Drupal 8 is actually to just disable JavaScript. So there are lots of ways to do that sort of list ordering, but one of the challenges is if you've got a long list, it doesn't fit in one page. Drag and drop is actually really quite frustrating and useless. But if you can turn off JavaScript and actually drop it down to, item 1 out of 5,000, then you'll be able to go off and to manage that more easily than expecting to be able to manage it all with the drag and drop interface. As far as tools, like the Wave toolbar is still really quite useful for so many users. I think if every developer used the Wave toolbar and did keyboard-only testing, so many issues would be resolved because it's getting better over time. But it's something that's just because it's visual, and most developers and designers are visual. It's something that can be can help them get meaning from issues. So those are definitely some tools I would recommend using. There's so many others as well that are useful to go off and to look at. The Lighthouse tool that is also something that's useful. There's a bunch of interesting command line operations that are available for that. Microsoft has also come out with WebHint, the webhint.io that's I guess trying to be a competitor to the Google Lighthouse implementation. Both of them have the ability to have a command line implementation that makes it easier for there to be immediate tests and your automatic testing for your developers. So.
Thank you.
Brilliant. And that brings us to the end of our time. But please put your hands together and say a huge thank you to Mike. How do I do that? I can't. Okay. We have dates confirmed for the next 3 months. Can I remember them off the top of my head? We've got Thursday the 18th of April. We've got Thursday the 21st of March. And we've got Thursday the 21st of February as well, I think. Do keep an eye out for those dates. We'll be promoting the speakers as soon as they're confirmed. I'd like to say another massive thank you to Sainsbury's and to Barclays for sponsoring us, so please put your hands together for them. Huge thanks to Raf for making this kind of all happen within Sainsbury's. Thanks for Meetup Video for doing the live streaming and for creating the videos that we'll be publishing in the next few days. Big thanks to Orla for just the speed and the precision that she provides with the speech to text. Some of us will be going to the pub. There's a pub called the Draft House, which is literally a 3-minute walk. It's kind of the other side of the building. You can either take a right or take a left. If you keep going round, you will get to the pub. So do come and join us for a drink if you fancy that. If not, hope to see you next month. Thanks. Oh, and obviously a huge thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Mike. And thank you to Charlie. Hopefully the videos should be up in the next couple of days, so do spread the word and share them with your colleagues and friends. So thank you very much.